All right. In this video, I want to talk about the four Babylons. Now, I guess there was be technically six, but I want to talk about the four interpretations of Revelation 18 and who Babylon is. Because there is a Babylon that starts with Nimrod, and there's the Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar, but then there is four Babylons that are interpretations of Revelation 18. And the first interpretation is that Babylon, the city in modern day Iraq, which was the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, and before that, it is where the original Babylon, where Nimrod was king, was also located, where they built the Tower of Babel. That place is going to be rebuilt. Now, I look at this interpretation as a possibility, but I don't think that's what is going to happen. And it has to do with Daniel chapter 2, where we read about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where he dreamed of a statue with a head of gold representing Babylon, his nation, his kingdom. But then it would be taken over by the chest and arms of silver, which was the Medo-Persian Empire, and then they would be conquered by the belly and thighs of brass, which is the Grecian Empire. Then they would be taken out by the legs of iron, being the Roman Empire. And at the end, the feet is not made of gold. The feet is not made of gold and clay. It's made of iron and clay. So the last kingdom is not a return to the gold, to Babylon, the original state. It's in its degraded state, right? So this city of Babylon, I don't see it happening, right? In modern day Iraq anyway, where they would have to be all of a sudden a world power where all trade goes to them, and Babylon would have to be rebuilt. Uh, this is a possibility that it could happen, and it could happen very fast because of technology and with the money that the Middle East has. And if nations join together, these Muslim nations, that could happen like that with the technology they have with these uh, 3D printing machines, that the machines actually do the building and they don't need rest, right? You just need some manpower to make sure that it's working properly, not making mistakes. So these things can happen very fast, whole cities, right? And they may even make them the 15-minute cities that they've been talking about. They could do that. It's a possibility. Personally, I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I could be wrong. There's a lot of brilliant Christians out there who think this is a possibility. I think Larkin, I read his book on Revelation. He believes that that's what's going to happen. Chuck Missler, uh, a very good preacher, he believes that. But I don't. I still like Larkin and Missler, like listening to them or with Larkin reading his material. But that doesn't mean I agree with everything that they say, right? So this I brought up first because I don't think this interpretation is correct. Now, maybe they will bring up some information to change my mind, because information about America being Babylon, at first I was like, that's nonsensical. I thought it was even more far-fetched than Babylon coming back in modern day Iraq. But when I started to hear them out, I was like, you know what, there might be something to that because of more recent study that I was getting into that actually has to do with Rome. You see, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, with the legs of iron, end up becoming the feet of iron and clay, and that's the end of time, end of the world as we know it, because that's when the rock without hands is cut out and strikes the statue at the feet. showing at the end when it's made of the iron and clay. And then it destroys the whole statue, and then God establishes his kingdom as this mountain that's going to encompass the whole world, right? So the iron and clay, you think, okay, well, clay, we'll put to the side right now, but we know the iron is Rome. So a lot of people think Rome, Babylon. And that makes sense because they are part of the body of Rome. The body is ruled by the head, right? The whole body, like your body, is you, right? Your toes are you. So even though the head is Babylon, the gold, the feet is still part of that same body. So the iron and clay there is part of Babylon, right? So you would see Rome, and a lot of people agree with that Rome is Babylon. And that makes a whole lot of sense. Whole lot of sense. Because Rome, through Roman Catholicism, actually has its pagan religion all over the world. And it is a pagan religion. It just uses Christian names, so they hide behind Christianity, right? Just like there's these, I don't know even what to call them. I guess we'll use the biblical term where it says that they are Jews and they are not. They are the synagogue of Satan. There's these satanic group that's hiding behind Jews. So people become anti-Semitic because of these satanic Jews that hide among the Jews. Well, that's how Roman Catholicism is. It's a pagan religion pretending to be Christian. It's usurping the place of Christianity. But it's just all the paganism of Rome, plus all the nations that Rome conquered, it would just bring in its religion into its own. So you can still worship your religion as long as you also worship the Roman pontiff, because the Roman pontiff was the Roman emperor. He was God on earth. And you had to worship him, and then you could also worship your own religion, your own other god or gods or goddesses and what have you, as long as you also paid homage to the Roman pontiff. That has just continued. And they brought in Judaism and their beliefs, and they brought in Christianity and their beliefs. So they just took their Queen of Heaven, Diana, and called her Mary. They took their gods of safe travel and protection and called them the saints of safe travels and the saint of protection. They just took their pantheon of gods and gave them Christian names. And they took their Roman pontiff and they put him in the place of God, calling him Holy Father, which is the title only for God, and calling the Vicar of the Christ as being Christ on earth, right? So you just took what Rome has always done and mixed it all together, paganism with Christian names on it. That doesn't make it Christian, right? It has fooled a lot of people. That's why talking to Catholics about Christianity, they think, what are you talking about? We're Christian. We're the Christians. It's like, no, you're not. Rome and the Roman Catholic Church has persecuted Christians, imprisoned them, tortured them, and put them to death. You're the enemy of Christianity. But they think that they are God's people, right? Because of this indoctrination that they've grown up with. So you can see how it's confusion, it's Babylon. And when you look at Catholicism, you see that all the time. You talk to a Catholic, and you're going to have so many contradicting beliefs that it's insane, that it doesn't make any sense. An example would be grace and works. I'll name a few of them because there's so many fork-tongued doublespeak that comes out of Catholicism. It's just weird how the Catholics themselves can't see this. There's got to be something within them that lets them know that this is wrong, because they can spot this kind of contradiction when it comes to politics or other religions, but they can't see it in themselves. Because they'll say, yeah, you're saved by grace, but you also need works. Is that doesn't make any sense, because grace is unearned and undeserved. You can't work for it and receive it as a reward. Grace is a gift, and the only way you can receive it is freely. You can't earn it or deserve it, or else it's not grace, right? Works is something you've earned and deserved. You went and did a job, you did what was required of you, or you didn't do what was required of you, and you've earned a reward, a payment, right? So it can't be both. They say that you have to be in a state of grace when you die to be saved. Well, a state of grace would be that you haven't earned it or deserved it. But they'll tell you that you need to work to earn the state of grace, which is a contradiction. It's forked tongue, serpentine, doublespeak. Yet they take it as pure doctrine of God, that it's Christian. And it's not. God is not the author of confusion. This is obviously Babylonian. I've recently talked to some Catholics about being sealed by God. And I brought up the 144,000. And I asked the Catholics, I said, can the 144,000 be lost and damned to hell? And they would say no, at least some of them. And some would say, how could they be lost? They're sealed by God. And I was like, okay, so they can't be condemned to hell? And they're like, no. They're sealed by God. They're protected. And I was like, okay. Well, Christians are sealed by God. Ephesians 1:13 says, as soon as we believe the word of truth, the gospel of our salvation, that Jesus Christ died for our sins. That's past, present, and future. All of it. The whole 9 yards. And he rose again the third day for our justification, according to the scriptures. Then you're saved. You're sealed by the Holy Spirit of God. So, when you're sealed by God, you can't be lost or condemned, then why do you believe that you can be lost and condemned? And then they'll say, well, I got free will. I can still choose to sin and this and what have you. And I said, oh, but the 144,000, when they're sealed, they lose their free will? They're like, no. And then I'm like, okay, then what's the deal? Like the people who go to heaven, when all of this is over and Satan has been punished, do you lose free will? And they'll say no. And it's like, oh, so you can still go to hell afterwards? And some of them would say yes. And I was like, but we're told that sin will not rise again the second time, and that there's no more death. The wages of sin is death, so there's going to be no more sin, or else there would be death, right? So the inconsistency and the contradiction that they have, where nothing lines up, it's just a gobbledygook mess. It's Babylonian confusion. And you look into all their beliefs on this, you'll see this. I even read recently in their own catechism. Let me get my phone here. I took a screenshot of it, so give me 1 second to take a look at it here. Yeah, let me read this to you. And this contradicts Catholic teachings, but it's in their own catechism, and they don't believe it here. This is the CCC. It says 1992. It doesn't give a page number or anything, but it says here, justification has been merited for us by the passion of Christ, who offered himself on the cross as a living victim, holy and pleasing to God, and whose blood has become the instrument of atonement for the sins of all men. Justification is conferred in baptism, the sacrament of faith. It conforms us to the righteousness of God, who makes us inwardly just by the power of his mercy. Its purpose is the glory of God and of Christ, and the gift of eternal life. And then there's a semicolon, even more detail here in another paragraph. It says, but now the righteousness of God has been made manifest apart from the law, although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinct, since all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus, who God put forward as an expiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he had passed over former sins, it was to prove at the present time that he himself is righteous and that he justifies him who has faith in Jesus. Right here in their own catechism, they're saying that you're saved by faith, not by your works, that you are justified and made righteous because of what God did through Jesus Christ at the cross, yet they don't believe that, which is weird because the Catholics won't believe the Bible when you preach it to them, but when they find it in the catechism, they'll believe it. But they don't believe that. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's part of the forked-tongued doublespeak. You see, Catholics will take that and they'll preach that to you to say, see, we believe we're saved by grace and through faith. Be like, yeah, okay. Then how come you then all of a sudden turn around and add works to it? You see, they think that you're stupid and that they can sucker you in saying, see, we believe what you believe, come on over here. And then they'll just all of a sudden dump all their works onto you. You got to do all this now. And it's like, wait, I thought you believed the same thing, that we're saved by faith through grace, and now you're putting the burden of the law on me? They're like, oh, no, it's not the law. What are you talking about? It's not the law. Here's another forked-tongued doublespeak, where they say, you're not under the law, you're not saved by the works of the law, but you have to do the works of the law. You can't sin. Sin is transgressive of the law. So you have to keep the Ten Commandments. You have to do the religious rituals. You do have to do the good works for God and your fellow man. Love God with all you got. Love your fellow man as yourself. All of that is the works of the law. And they say you have to do that or you're lost. But then they'll say that you're not under the law and you don't have to do the law to be saved. So you see this forked-tongued serpentine doublespeak. That's part of Babylonian confusion, right? So with all of this and this long explanation, I hope you can see how Rome is definitely Babylonian, right? And it fits with Daniel's chapter 2's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and at the end of time, what we would have, right? And it makes more sense when you say, come out of her, my people, and be not partakers of her sins. Well, if Babylon in Iraq was to be rebuilt, like we see here in this picture, would there actually be Christians and Jews there? There might be some, but in a Muslim land, they don't really encourage that. So there wouldn't really be many. If there was, be very few, right? Be like, all right, get out. It's not like a real big issue that there's a lot of Christians and Jews in Babylon, right? Unless they were forced to be there, which is a possibility because Satan likes to hide behind God's people. That's why he's the synagogue of Satan. He knows if he hides among God's people, God's not going to destroy him because he has human shields, right? The same thing with Christianity, where he has Roman Catholicism, where they're claiming to be Christian. He hides among the Christians so that he has human shield. So Christians and Jews could be forced to live in Babylon, Iraq. And he says to come out. Kind of like Lot, come out because he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, we'll come out of Babylon because he's going to destroy it. Possibility, but don't really see that. And even with Rome, there's not really much of God's people there. Not really any Jews in Roman Catholicism, because Roman Catholicism is very anti-Semitic. Just look at all the papal bulls. Look at Nazi Germany, Hitler, the child of Rome. They're not very friendly with the Jews. And the true Christians generally are not in Catholicism. Those who truly believe the gospel are not Catholic, right? Those who are self-righteous, pagan, heathen, pharisaical, they're Roman Catholic, right? So even with Rome, there's a problem saying, oh, come out of her, my people. Even though you could say there's some people in Roman Catholicism that they never really made the choice. They haven't really heard the gospel. So maybe it's a call to, hey, here's the gospel, believe and come out. Because it's not necessarily always a come out physically, like, oh, you're in this building here and you need to leave. it could be a spiritual sense where even though you're not even in the city, let's say you're out here or someplace where you can't see off screen, you're not actually in the city, but spiritually you are because you submit to the king of Babylon, not to God, and you had the beliefs of Babylon, not of Christianity, in God saying, come out and believe the truth, right? So, in a spiritual sense, that could be something, right? But there's still some flaws there with Rome in the sense that the trade, you look in Revelation 18 and it talks about they buy up all the merchandise. And you can actually see this a bit with Rome because it's not just the city of Rome. The city of Rome influences the world, where it has its own little also city-state of London, which is not a part of England. It has its own little city-state of Washington, D.C., which is not a part of the United States. They're interconnected. They're owned by the Vatican. And not only that, but the Roman Catholic Church throughout the world, they buy up a lot of merchandise to build up their churches, to build their idols, to clothe their priesthood, to deck them in scarlet and purple, like we read about in Revelation, and to buy up bread and wine for their Eucharist services, to buy up the incense for their services. So you can see a lot of connection, right? And how they do buy up a lot of the world's merchandise on certain things, right? And it doesn't seem like it fits perfectly, but there's definitely this connection. But then when you understand that Babylon has a daughter, and in Revelation 18 it says Babylon is fallen, it tells us twice. And I was thinking, you know what, this might be a reference to Babylon and her daughter, because it talks about how Babylon is the mother of harlots. And if you've seen one of my recent videos about 1776, the Catholic Revolution, where I talked about how Rome wanted to destroy Protestantism. So they sent the Spanish Inquisition to attack England. Not the Spanish Inquisition, the Spanish Armada, their fleet of ships, to attack and destroy England and to make it Catholic. But God said, no, that's not going to happen, and just destroyed the Spanish fleet in a storm right outside of England and devastated Spain. So right there, Rome realized that they can't fight God's people head on. So Rome actually got the two Protestant nations, England and America, to fight each other. Divide and conquer. Get brother to fight against brother. Because they can't fight against us, but they can get us to fight each other. And then God's not going to choose a side, right? He would try to get the brothers to stop fighting. But because of the Revolutionary War, both England and America were weakened and indebted. And after that, America went from common law and the people being free to being under Roman civil law that we have today and enslaved. And from having no income tax to having what today is around 40% income tax. Because we're now a Roman colony run in Washington, D.C., a Roman state. And then after that, Catholic France gave America the Statue of Liberty, an idol representing actual Satan, as it depicts a picture of Satan where he's bringing forth his legions. And America has basically been the military force of Rome. And all of our attacks into the Middle East have just been crusades, right? So I got into more detail on that in my videos about it, just giving a brief overview here. So you can see how America would be the daughter of Babylon. and how New York makes a lot of sense where people talk about, hey, this is Babylon. You see all the waters that it's on and all the trade that goes on here in America and New York specifically. And God's people are there. Well, there's a lot of Jews that live in New York, and there's Christians that live in New York. And where God says, come out of her, my people, you can say, hey, maybe it come out of America. But it can also mean come out of the system. Like I was saying, there's something spiritual there, where you realize that common law is the highest law of the land, that you come out from being under Roman civil law, where it has no jurisdiction over you if you don't have a social security number, you don't have that birth certificate, ID, driver's license, and all these things, that it has no jurisdiction over you. You don't have to abide by their laws, rules, and regulations because they have no jurisdiction. Just like America can't force China to obey its laws, and China can't force America to obey its laws because there's no jurisdiction. Well, when you realize that, there's another way you come out, right? So that you're not partakers of the sins and you're not sitting there supporting Babylon and putting all your labor and tax money and everything into this system that ends up enslaving you and then raging wars to kill others, right? And yeah, so those are the first three Babylons, where it's the city of Babylon in Iraq, Rome, which makes a whole lot of sense, and even with the United States as a daughter of Babylon makes a whole lot of sense. So what is the fourth interpretation? Well, I believe that it's actually has to do with Jerusalem and Israel, that that's actually going to be Babylon. You see, when you look at the statue and it's the iron legs, you know it's Rome, so you think Rome and you can think America, daughter of Babylon kind of thing, and what have you, and all the trade that's going on and all that in America. Yeah, you can see how that makes a lot of sense, right? Excuse me. But what about the clay? The last kingdom isn't just iron, it's iron and clay, so there's a mixture. Well, when you read in the scriptures, the Old Testament, such as in Isaiah and Jeremiah, I think there's other places, it refers to Israel, God's people, as clay. And God is the potter, and he molds Israel into what he wants it to be. And if you submit to his molding, he'll mold you into something glorious. But if you fight against it, well, then, of course, it's going to mess up, right? And in Daniel, it says that the clay is miry, as in dirty, and it's baked, as in it's hardened. So this clay is sinful, dirty, and hardened up, like resistant against God. That's why it's mingled with the iron. Just like the Jews said when rejecting Jesus, we have no king but Caesar. So you see how right there they made that mixing. And when the Antichrist shows up, he shows up with a bow, which is a symbol of a covenant. We know that he has this 7-year covenant. So there's that mixing of the iron and clay, but it doesn't quite cling together. It's a very awkward marriage, a very odd couple, right? Where they're trying to make things work, but it just doesn't really work. They don't really cling together too well, right? So I think what we see going on in the world today is going to trigger World War III. And just like at World War I, they put forth the Balfour Declaration to bring Israel back as a nation. After World War II, Israel came back as a nation. Well, after World War III, Israel is going to be established as the head of the nations. That's where we finally get the iron and the clay, where it's made together. In Israel, being the head of the nations, Rome is going to move its headquarters there. Like we read in Daniel that the place of his dwelling was destroyed, and he comes from the northwest because he comes to the east and to the south to battle. And then he comes to Israel to establish his abode there. And that's where going to be the headquarters of course, Jerusalem, but also the New World Order, the UN, the Vatican, Babylon, and that's where you have again that mixing and the confusion where they accepted the wrong king, right? And Israel is in a very good spot where it's to be the center of all kinds of trades, and it's probably going to buy up a whole lot of stuff. So this might be some future thing where we read about being clothed in purple and scarlet, right? As the end of this dispensation that we are getting into, where it says Babylon is fallen, the end of this age of grace, we might see the destruction of Rome and the United States. But then there's a short dispensation of 7 years before Jesus returns. And in that dispensation, Babylon will be rebuilt in Israel, in Jerusalem. That's why that great city is in Revelation 11 is said to be spiritually Sodom in Egypt. Right? Again, the confusion and all this mixing. And this is the fourth interpretation of Revelation chapter 18. It's the one that I hold to. And then when it says Babylon is fallen, so the second time, that's going to be when Israel, Jerusalem, is destroyed because it went after the wrong king. Excuse me. And it's going to be destroyed. And that's what we read about in Zechariah, Daniel, Revelation, these prophecies of what's going to be going on. And your thoughts, leave them in the comments. Tell me what you think. I'm going to take a break here, get some water, but what I'm going to end up adding to this is I'm going to come over to Revelation 18. I'm going to read through it and see the connections, see the connection to each one of these Babylons. And we'll see if it helps support all of them, none of them, a couple of them, three of them, whatever, and take it from there. So keep watching. It'll just be a moment for you. But yeah. All right. Continuing with this video here, let's read through Revelation chapter 18 and just take a couple of looks at how this might apply to each one of the four Babylons that I mentioned. So let's go paragraph by paragraph, and if need be, verse by verse. All right, so it says here, verse 1, "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies." Okay, this angel that comes down sounds like the angel where we get the three angels' messages, I think I want to say Revelation 14, because we got an angel saying the everlasting gospel, which is not the same gospel of grace. If you read what that angel's preaching, it has nothing to do with Jesus Christ dying for your sins, raising again the third day for your justification. It's not the same gospel because it's a different dispensation. Then there's another angel that comes out saying, what is he saying? I think he's talking about Babylon is fallen, is fallen. And it's the third angel that actually says, whoever worships the beast and his image and takes his mark is damned. So I think it's the second angel that talks about this. Um, and Babylon has fallen, and now we're getting detail about this Babylon and why it's fallen. Now it says is fallen is fallen. It says it twice, and when I see something twice, I always remember what happened in Genesis where Joseph interprets the Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh had a dream first dealing with fat cows and lean, starving cows, and then he had a dream about very plump corn and then very scarce corn. And Joseph tells him that the dreams are one and you're told it twice because it's soon to happen. So every time I see something twice like that, it's because it's about to happen. And in uh, Joseph's case, it seems to have happened pretty quick because right after that, the Pharaoh put Joseph second in command and had him prepare for what was to come. And that seems like it was happening right then. This is your 7 years of plenty to prepare for the 7 years of famine because it's happening right now, right? So when this angel is saying it, that's what's going on. This is about to come down, right? But also when it says it is fallen, there might be two aspects. This could be something like the physical aspect of Babylon is fallen and the spiritual aspect of Babylon is fallen. Because this might have to do with there being war in heaven and Satan and his angels are cast out of heaven. I even saw something earlier today. What I like to do sometimes is I check out these videos that are compilation of TikTok videos. And it has to do with just weird, strange things that people are either talking about or they videotaped or something like supernatural. And I like to check them out to see if there's anything with it, what the world sees and how they interpret it. And there was one of them talking about Saturn, and Saturn's rings are no longer going to be visible by the year 2025, as if they're just going to disappear. So they're saying something is interesting about that. And I was like, yeah, that is very interesting because Saturn represents Satan, and there's going to be war in heaven, and he's going to be cast out. I wonder if that has something to do with it. Like I was saying, the rapture, I would believe, from what I've looked at, would be between the years 2024 and 2026. I could be wrong. If we're raptured before then, awesome. Like right now, I'm cool with that. But if it happens after 2027, hey, I was wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about. This is just how I'm seeing it, how it looks. It's that window, right? And I would even say halfway into 2024 because the Jewish year would start in the spring. So even go to the spring of 2027, but that's that's a stretch. But that's just how I see things. I would even say my personal opinion. Take that for what you will. But all these things coming together seems to make a whole lot of sense. So Babylon has fallen. It could be Satan being cast out of heaven. He has fallen. And Babylon, the system here on this world, is fallen because Satan is the god of this world. So if he falls, the systems of this world are probably going to collapse. And we're probably going to have world war. That's why the rapture is about to happen. We're going to be taken up. There's probably going to be war in heaven, and there's going to be war here on earth. Because as above, so below, or as Jesus puts it, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So we're going to see the same things going on like a mirror in each other, right? Or the quantum entanglement kind of thing, where the physical and spiritual world are intertwined and connected. So this fallen is fallen could be the two aspects of spiritual and physical. It could also be the Babylon of this world right now, of this age, the church age, falls, and then the Babylon of the 7 year period that's about to happen when the rapture happens, that the Babylon that comes about then will also fall, right? So it could have all these meanings, It could be one of the meanings, uh, or something else that I'm just not seeing, right? But these are just the things that I think about when I hear Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. So, with that being said, we see that Babylon has become the habitation of devils. Today, people call them demons, but demons just more or less means some kind of spirit. Devils is letting you know that it's the fallen angels and evil spirits, maybe even from the Nephilim, right? So devils is a distinction letting you know that it's something evil, right? And it says the whole of every foul spirit, right? Again, making that same connection. The cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Just like in Luke chapter 8, where we read about the parable of the sower, it talks about the fowl, the birds. They come and try to eat up the word of God before you actually truly understand it and believe it and accept it and call upon Jesus for your salvation. They try to intercept that and stop that whole process. That's why the ground has to be prepared to receive the word so that the seed goes into the earth or into the heart and then is protected from foul where they can't get it anymore. Right? It's too late, it's there. And this Babylon is the habitation of these devils. This makes me think of a couple of things here. If I look at Babylon as in the city in modern day Iraq, there's stories about there being weird, I forgot the name of the creature, but it's like a half man, half goat kind of creatures there, and these other jinn and demonic activity there where people don't dwell there. It's a place for the devils. So that sounds kind of interesting. It ties to that a little bit, right? I hear the stories from the Catholics saying that the Vatican is where Satan is, and there's all kinds of this weird demonic activity and human sacrifice, child sacrificial rituals going on, weird stuff there. Um, Even this one Catholic, I'll check out his videos every now and then. Matter of fact, I haven't checked it out in a while. I might check him out later. His YouTube username is VaticanCatholic.com. I think it actually is a dot, but it might be spelled out. I haven't checked it out in a while. But he actually looks at the Vatican as Babylon, but he's still Catholic. He just thinks that the church is in Babylon or something along those lines. And you can see a lot of the paganism and all that stuff with the Catholic Church. So you can see, again, the devils, the foul spirits there. So you can see how it applies there. And then if you apply it also to New York and the United States, well, yeah, look at it here, where everybody thinks that they aren't what they really are. They're something else, right? They're cats, where some young lady will think they're a purple and pink haired male cat. And some young man thinks that he is a polka dotted dog, but a female dog, right? Not to mention the other things, different transgender stuff and homosexual mindsets and how good is evil and evil is good. And I'm teaching this stuff to children and trying to get out to the children. And then you got groups of anti-Semitic, Nazi-like people and KKK things going on, and communist groups wanting a revolution. And you got a lot of the Trumpers, I guess, wanting Donald Trump. They got their own QAnon little crazy group going on. You got all the crazy stuff with Hollywood and the music industry, all kinds of satanic stuff there, and all kinds of talks about the Illuminati and them making their deals with the devil and signing their contracts in blood and all these crazy stuff, and how when they don't go along, they get killed and cloned and all this stuff, and all kinds of crazy stuff. Not to mention the crazy stuff with politics and the media being very biased and one-sided, all this manipulation, right? So you can see how America can fit into this thing, habitation of devils, of foul spirits, all this division and hate, and everybody just clashing, right? The whole country, at least when you look at politics and you look at the media, is just, it's chaos, right? And then when you apply it to Israel, right now, I think of something like denying Jesus Christ. That's pretty demonic, devilish. Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the world. So you see the same kind of thing going on there, and it might get worse when they really mingle with the beast, right? During this or after this world war it's about to come about. It might take a little bit before they get going because people don't really want to do it, but it's one of those things that has to happen. But they trying to delay it and all this stuff, and God's willing to delay it to get more people saved. Praise God. Hopefully some of my family and friends wake the heck up and don't have to go through what's to come upon this world here shortly. But you can see how it potentially applies to all of them. More towards America and Rome, in my opinion, makes more sense for them, at least at the moment here. And then it goes on to say, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So wine is teachings and doctrines, right? And the wrath of her fornication. Spiritual fornication is usually in connection when the church mixes with the state, right? In unholy union there. Because, excuse me, the church, our government, our king is Jesus Christ. So when you accept Rome, you accept the United States, and you become mingled with the state, such as Roman Catholicism is the church mingled with the state, that's fornication, right? And the Protestant churches have followed along with that, and they become 501c3 organizations where they are government organizations, where they mix the church with the state, right? So when you see that, you see these teachings, these doctrines of mixing church and state, which means the church has to end up submitting to the state because the state ends up being the husband in this marriage, right? The head. And that's fornication, just like where Israel, their king is Jesus, they rejected him. So they rejected their God-given state, their nation, and they said, we have no king but Caesar. They just fornicated. They just committed adultery on God by saying that, right? And it says here, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth wax rich through the abundance of her delicacies. That, I can't apply that, at least to the moment, to Babylon and Iraq. Not exactly to Israel either, other than you could say some of these Zionist Jews, they're in all kinds of different countries. They have a lot of pull. But with the merchants of the earth waxing rich through her, this definitely seemed to tie more into America and a bit into Rome, as I was mentioning how the Vatican has to spend a lot of money to bring in what they need for their churches, for their garments, for their incense and their candles and their wafers and their wine and their golden cups and all these fancy things that they got to make their idols and all that stuff. So you can see how this, in my opinion, fits more to, at least at the moment, to Rome and America. But feel free, leave your comments where you agree, disagree, or you see things by a different angle. I'm more than willing to hear you out. All right, so let's continue here. It says here, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, mourning, and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. Excuse me. Now, to understand this here, the destruction here, the burned with fire, we actually read in the previous chapter, Revelation 17, that this city, Babylon, is actually a harlot riding upon the beast, right? And at the end of Revelation 17, it says that the 10 kings who will end up ruling the NWO, so we can see that this system hasn't completely come about as of yet, that they will hate the whore and utterly destroy her. Which is kind of interesting because I heard a story a while ago about people believing France was going to nuke America. And I thought that was very strange. But there's people who say that the 10 kings are 10 nations of Europe, France being one of them. And if those are the 10 kings and they end up hating the whore and they claim that to be America and they destroy it, well, that would fulfill this quite well. But to say this is Babylon and Iraq, this can't fit right then because it says, come out of her, my people. I've heard some people say that this is a reiteration of the start of the Great Tribulation, and where God is saying, come out of her, my people, be not partakers of her sins and receive not of her plagues, that they are saying that this is the rapture. I never saw it that way, but they could be right. If we look at it that way, they're taken out before she's destroyed, right? Because he says, come out, don't be partakers of her sins, receive not of her plagues, because the plagues are poured out like we see in Egypt during the time of Jacob's trouble. The plagues are going to come upon Babylon in the time of Jacob's trouble. So right when we are taken out, this could be poured out upon her. Makes some sense. But this couldn't really apply to Babylon in Iraq because it's desolate. There's nobody living there. So it couldn't apply to them, at least not right now, right? It could apply to Rome and all the places that the Vatican has the Catholics all over the place. It can apply to America because there's Catholics and Jews, Christians and Jews in America. And if it's talking about the people being raptured, yes, I'm in America or on America, and I'm Christian. So, yeah, saying come out of her, that makes some sense there. But to say this is Israel, there's actually makes a little bit of sense there because Jesus says, hey, there's going to be all kinds of false Christs. There's going to be people who hate you, and they're going to bring you before the synagogue, and the people who put you to death, they're going to think they're doing the Lord's will. Well, there's a lot of Messianic Jews in Israel, and Jesus tells them when he's saying this, flee from Judea, go to the mountains, or to Petra, where they'll be protected for this time. Where Petra is the rock, Jesus Christ, who's the foundation of the church, which is going to act kind of like Noah's Ark for Israel and those that join themselves to her. So you can see how it can make sense for three of the groups there. Not for Babylon, Iraq, but the other ones, it makes some sense. Not so much for Rome, come out of her, my people. Not really any of God's people in Rome. Because if you believe the gospel, you're not going to be Catholic. You believe the scriptures, you're not going to be Catholic. That's just how it is. You may say you believe the the scriptures as a Catholic, but you really don't. You believe your church's interpretation of them. So you don't believe them, you believe what your church says about them. You didn't make this opinion on your own by your own study. You grew up Catholic and they told you that's what it said and you just went with it. If you questioned it, they belittled you. I've seen this myself. So you can say that doesn't happen. I'll call you a liar. I grew up with it and I've seen it with family. So you can sit there and pretend that they allow you to question all that, and it's like, no, they don't, especially if you question the priest. What are you doing? But then when they go home, they will talk trash about the priest. So you confuse your child. We're like, well, you're just acting like he's a man like the rest of us. And so I question him, and it's not even a question like you're challenging the church. You just ask them a simple question, and they're like, how dare you? And they start kissing the priest's ass. And it's like, what's going on here? He's special, he's above us, but you talk so much trash about him. So you confuse your children, but that's what you get from Babylon, right? Confusion. Fork-tongued doublespeak, straight from the serpent. But ultimately, come out over my people really seems to apply to America, and I can see how it applies to Israel. Those two seem to fit quite well. And where it talks about her sins, well, America's due for being judged for her sins. Some people think Israel should be too. I more agree with America and the sins that we do here. And this could be like a lot kind of thing, where when we're taken out, America's destroyed. And I remember even watching videos from the 80s and 90s, a lot of them from the Prophecy Club, where there'd be a lot of people coming warning about how America is going to be destroyed by nuclear war. A lot of times they mention Russia, and sometimes they'll mention China. So if they really truly receive some prophecy, some warnings of God, a lot of people seem to be agreeing with it now, right? But sitting here saying, I sit a queen and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Babylon and Iraq, that doesn't apply to them, right? Or it says, we say that to the Catholic Church. Yeah, you could say that about the Catholic Church. They think that they rule the world. God-given right to do so. You could say the same thing about Israel. Sit a queen, right? And they're not a widow, even though they are, right? Their true husband, God, Jesus Christ, died, right? To America, it's kind of the same attitude, right? Oh, you talk about the things that happen in other countries and you say, hey, it's going to happen here. And people are like, oh, it never happened here. This is America. And yet, what do we see happening here, right? It can happen here. And the fact that you think it couldn't is why it is, because if we did something when people started saying something about it, we wouldn't be where we are today. But since you thought it could not happen here, that arrogance allowed it to happen here. It's like you let in the Trojan horse. Even though you know the story, you heard of the story, you still let the horse in. You let the enemy in, right? But yeah, ultimately, the first part I can see applying to America and Israel. Later on about the Queen part, I can see applying more to Israel and Rome, but also to America. Nothing really applying to Babylon and Iraq other than a place and habitation of devils, right? But let's continue on here. Let's look at this paragraph here. Short one here, verses 9 and 10. It says, and the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Now this seems to apply more to America than any of the other four. Because you see, the other countries have fornicated and made these deals with America, and they're using the United States currency as the world reserve currency and for the only exchange for oil currency, and they have all gotten rich off of their deals with America. And if America were to go down, it's the economic impact is going to affect the whole world. So you can see how it really applies to America here. So if they saw New York, Washington, D.C., great American cities destroyed, people would stand in awe. If you said this about Rome, and Rome was destroyed, you're like, okay, I can see people would be like, whoa, but what fornication have they committed with Rome? Other than Rome basically owns the United States. So through the United States, yeah, they've been dealing with Rome. But if we just looked at Rome by itself, Vatican there, have people really gotten rich and lived deliciously because of their deals with the Roman Catholic Church? Maybe there's something there I don't know about, but can't really apply it to Rome. And I can't really apply it to Israel either. Definitely can't apply it to modern Babylon and Iraq either, right? This seems to fit more America. And so far, America has fit everything. The other ones, not so much, especially right here, right? Now, this paragraph, bit longer, bit longer. But let's take a look at it here. We might take breaks to just focus verse by verse because it is quite long. As it says here, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. That doesn't apply to Babylon and Iraq. That wouldn't apply to Israel, at least right now. Right now, it doesn't. And doesn't really apply to Rome, slightly, because they do buy a lot of stuff from around the world to support their religious rituals, right? But you can definitely say applies to America, right? Because America is more of an importer than an outporter. They import more goods from other nations than we give out, and we're increasingly taking more in than we're giving out of anything, right? And it says the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and fine wood and all manner of vessel of ivory and all manner of vessel of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble. We can see this applying to America, but I can also see this applying to Rome because they use all these things for their churches, their instruments, their utensils, their idols, their rituals of the Eucharist, and other such things. They would use all these things. Pretty much everything here, right? And as it goes on, it says, and cinnamon and odors and ointments, and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beast and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. Now, I can't apply this to Babylon and Iraq. Can't really apply it to Israel, but we can apply it to America and Rome because America buys a lot of these things, but so does Rome. They use all these ointments and incense for their little rituals where they have this little lantern-like thing that they shake around, having all the smoke come out, right? And they need all the wine and oil and flour for their uh, wafer and wine ceremony there. Now the beast, sheep, horses, and chariots. Not too sure about that with Rome, but you can have that apply to America. And the slaves and souls of men, definitely with America and Rome, because Rome through America has the Roman law system where they claim to own every soul, everybody on earth. And they own you through uh, the documents of your birth certificate, and when they take the baby's footprint and put it on the uh, stamp it on the paper saying they got your soul there and they mix it with ink and blood there. They don't always do that so much anymore, but they don't need to because they got the birth certificate and the social security numbers, and you willingly go get the other stuff like the driver's licenses and the IDs and all that stuff, where you agree to all this stuff. That's how they have jurisdiction over you and they own you, and that's why you have to submit what they say. And they're like, oh yeah, you're free, but you're free to obey us, right? Because they sit there and they trade your social security number, which is a representation of your soul in their system, and they trade it among themselves with the stock market, making these deals with all this stuff, right? So this definitely applies to America with the stock market, but it's a whole system that ties into Rome, where the Vatican believes they own everybody because they're satanic. But it goes on to say, and the fruits that the soul lusteth after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee. Thou shalt find them no more at all. This somewhat apply to Rome and in different places where they take care of the people there better than they do some other areas. This also, same thing can apply to America, somewhat to Israel, right? But it can't apply to Babylon in Iraq. It goes on to say, the merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. This seems to point more to the Vatican, where their priesthood wears the scarlet and the purple. You go look at their meetings, they'll have a lot of white robes covered with red scarves and stuff, or purple scarves and headdresses and stuff, and they got all the gold necklaces with their religious symbolism and what have you, with the pearls and all the precious gemstones and all this, all decorated there. This definitely looks a lot like Rome, right? When you think of America, you're not thinking people clothed with fine linen, purple and scarlet, and decked with gold, precious stones, and pearls. Can't really say that makes me think of America, right? Other than a symbol of wealth, okay. Can't really see it applying to Israel as of yet. But I think in the future, the Vatican will be moved to Jerusalem. And I think that's what's going to end up happening. But that might be the second phase. We might see America destroyed, even to parts of Europe, and things get moved over to Israel. I think that's what's going to happen, because we read that in Daniel about this prince that comes. He comes from the northwest because he ends up coming to the east and the south to fight, and then he comes into the pleasant land, and his dwelling place was destroyed. Right? So that's why he's coming to stay in Israel. But it goes on to say, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. Before I continue with this, it made me think of Donald Trump there, because Israel loves Donald Trump. And you imagine if New York was destroyed, his dwelling place was destroyed, New York, and then he would go to Israel where they love him there, and who knows what he would do there. He calls himself a great builder. I wonder if he ends up having something to do with building the temple there. But anyway, goes on to say, and every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? So it's like, what city is like unto this great city? Does that make you think of Babylon and Iraq? Not right now, no, not at all. So if this has to do with the rapture, like some people say in verse 4, this is definitely not Babylon and Iraq. Can it apply to America, like New York? Yeah, New York is very iconic. What city is like onto New York? Could you also apply it to Rome, the Vatican? Yeah, what city is like that? But would the merchants really be upset? I'm not too sure about that one. Maybe a little bit, but not as much as if it was New York and America. At least I wouldn't think so. And if we applied it to Jerusalem, I wouldn't really say that, at least not right now, right? It goes on to say, and they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city. You see how it keeps saying that great city? When you read in here, in Revelation that is, you'll read about that great city being referenced to Jerusalem, I believe in Revelation chapter 11, where it talks about that great city spiritually called Sodom and Gomorrah, where Jesus was crucified. So you say that great city, the context of Revelation seems to be pointing to Jerusalem. But this also has a lot of reference to what we see today as New York, great city, because it says uh, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. And this fits New York pretty well, right? Especially with all the ports. It's surrounded by water there, with its islands and what have you. It fits that pretty well. Not so much with Babylon in Iraq, not so much with Israel, Jerusalem there, at least not at the moment. A little bit with Rome, but really fits quite well with New York in the United States. But it goes on to say here, keep in mind that New York was the original capital of America. But it goes on to say here, rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. Now see, this is not something that I can necessarily apply to America. Because as America, what did they do to the apostles or the prophets? Nothing. America didn't even exist at that time. Can I have that apply to Babylon and Iraq? No, because Babylon didn't do anything to the apostles or to the prophets. I don't recall them killing any prophet. Yes, they went and they attacked Israel, but nothing about them doing anything to the prophets. They definitely didn't do anything to the apostles. But who did do something to the apostles and the prophets? Well, Jesus says Israel, they're guilty of, at least the religious leadership, the Pharisees, are guilty of the blood of all the righteous on the earth, from Abel all the way to Zechariah at the time, who was John the Baptist's father, who was stoned to death outside of the temple. And they went after the apostles, but so did Rome. Rome put to death apostles, right? So you can see here how this applies to Rome and Israel, and why I think that, hey, it's the iron and clay. I think this is something that's going to happen during the Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, is things are going to be similar to how it was when Jesus was here on earth, and that was Rome was in Jerusalem and ruled over Israel, but also offered protection to Israel too. And they were joined together. So we're going to see that same thing go on, because both went after the apostles and prophets, right? That can't apply to Babylon and Iraq. It can't apply to America, right? So, yeah, that verse 20 is a big one, very key, right? Because that narrows things down quite a bit. Because who did anything to the apostles that need to be revenged? America did nothing. Babylon, Iraq did nothing to the apostles. But Rome and Israel did. Israel gave up Jesus to the Romans, said we have no king but Caesar. Israel stoned Stephen to death. The Romans put Paul to death. So you can see that applies definitely to them. but we can't apply it to America or Babylon and Iraq. And I know I keep saying the same thing over and over, but I wanted to really state that because you got to take that into consideration. This is a characteristic of Babylon. They did something to the apostles. That narrows things down quite a bit, doesn't it? But we got one last paragraph here. Thanks you for bearing with me. I know this is going to be a long video when I put everything together here. But it says here, verse 21 to 24, and a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. You can say this has to do with America, the magicians and all that stuff. You can say it has to do with the Vatican as well. They have these weird, strange party things going on there. The weird circus-like events and ecumenical movements, bringing all these different religious things in there. You can even apply it to Israel, to Jerusalem, right? It says, no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. Light of a candle, or I've heard people say as a reference to the church. Church ain't going to be there anymore. I wouldn't apply that to Babylon and Iraq. Can apply it to Israel, can apply it to Rome, can apply it to America. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. The bride and the bridegroom would be Jesus and the church. That it can apply to three, but not to Babylon and Iraq, right? For thy merchants were great men of the earth, for by their sorceries were all nations deceived. This makes me think of, pharmacy. I can't say too much about it because you say certain words, you get flagged and they take down your videos and all that stuff. That's why you should check me out on also BitChute and Rumble. And I think I'm going to start doing some short TikTok videos. Yeah, I think you can do 10 minutes on TikTok, so I think I can make some short ones there. But anyway, the sorceries, that word there for sorceries in the Greek is pharmakia. And it makes me think of the WHO, World Health Organization, deceiving all nations. And that has to do with more or less Europe, right? More of a connection to Rome than America, where Donald Trump wanted to stop funding the WHO. And then all of a sudden this thing happened a couple years ago, where everybody was going to die because of this boogeyman going around, right? And you had to wear masks and stuff. I'm going to leave it at that just so I don't get flagged for something stupid, for free speech and what have you, for disagreeing with YouTube. But the last verse here says, in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. Now, this can't apply to Babylon and Iraq. Can't really apply to America other than it's tied to Rome, but it can apply to Rome and Israel, right? Because Jesus said to the Pharisees, they're guilty of the blood of all the righteous, from Abel, which was before Israel existed, all the way to Zechariah, and obviously they worked with Rome to put Jesus to death. And they said, we have no king but Caesar. So from there, the Pharisaical Jews mixed with Rome, and they ended up creating Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholicism is just a continuation of Judaism, the Pharisaical Judaism, mixed with paganism and Christianity. That's why they mock Jesus with this Eucharist. You may be thinking, how does a Eucharist mocking Jesus? Well, it's the same way Moses mocked the golden calf that they were all worshiping. What did he do? He melted it down, ground it up, and mixed it with water so that they could eat and drink their God. Physically eat and drink their God. Not spiritually eat and drink their God. Physically eat and drink their God to show you that your God is fecal matter, is crap, a turd. And of course that same Jewish insult is carried on into Roman Catholicism, where the Pharisees aren't a big fan of Jesus. Neither are the Catholics. They give some lip service, but that's it. They care more about the Queen of Heaven, Diana, than they do about Jesus. And they have that ritual to insult Jesus. And they think that they are worshiping him and they're eating his flesh and blood, literally speaking. And it's spiritual food, even though it's physical food. They're brainwashed and indoctrinated into a cult. It can't be more obviously so unless you're inside of the cult yourself. Been brainwashed by him. You're outside, you can see it clearly. But they fear to go outside because they think they're safe where they're at. Because they're the true church and they're safe and they're doing the right things. Because their church told them so. And their church can't be wrong. It's infallible. It's perfect. So I gotta listen to them no matter what. Even if it doesn't make sense and it contradicts and it's forked-tongued doublespeak, gotta still listen to it. Or else Jesus is a liar, because then the gates of hell prevailed. But anyway, done with that. The blood of the prophets and of the saints. That can only apply to Israel and Rome, as Rome also would have killed Christians. And they still were killing Christians even after Constantine supposedly converted. And then he self-proclaimed himself head of the church. How convenient for him. And then they still persecuted the Christians that didn't join in. It didn't stop. All they did was paganize Christianity. Can't beat them, join them. That's all that happened. Yet, for some reason, Catholics think Constantine converting is a big deal. And it was a good thing. What are you talking about? He waged war in the name of Jesus Christ, where Jesus said, love your enemies, bless those that curse you, turn the other cheek. I came to save men's lives, not destroy them. Told the soldier, oh, you're a soldier? Make sure you harm nobody. Do violence to no man. Yet, Constantine converted and he's killing people in the name of Jesus. Oh yeah, he's Christian. There's something wrong with you. You're not Christian. And what's going to be upon your head is going to be so much worse, because not only are you doing something that's not Christian, but you're applying it to Christianity. And I talk to atheists all the time, where I tell them I'm Christian. And then they'll start talking about crusades and the Inquisition. And I'm like, what does it have to do with Jesus? What does it have to do with the Bible and what Jesus taught? That actually goes against what Jesus said. They're like, oh, well, it was done. Yeah. And isn't it obvious that they're not Christian? How is it where Jesus says, I come to save men's lives, not destroy them? Love your enemies. And then people go, yeah, I'm Christian, I follow Jesus, and they start killing people, and you're like, hey, look at Christians, look at what Jesus taught. I mean, you got to be stupid if you think that's what it is. Obviously, they're not really following Jesus, they're not really Christians. What I like to do when I talk to these people is I take their name. The last fellow I was talking to about this was a fellow, Nick Jordan. I grew up going to school with him, and he's atheistic, and he was saying these things. And I was like, okay, so if I took your name, and I was like, hey, I'm Nick Jordan, and I went into a restaurant, and I just started pissing on everybody's food and on them when they're eating, does that mean you, Nick Jordan, that you're a jerk? Because I did it in your name? Of course, he didn't respond to that. But it's the same concept with the Catholics saying, oh, we're Christian, and they pissing all over the place. And you say, hey, look at Christianity. Well, obviously, they're not Christian when you look at Jesus. Because Christian means follower of Jesus, and Jesus didn't teach those things. It's illogical and unreasonable. But atheists tend to be that way. They got their beliefs, and they'll grab whatever they can, because they don't have much. They have to grab whatever to quench their conscience, to make them think that they're doing the right thing and believing what they're believing, and rejecting Jesus and rejecting Christianity. And they actually like the Catholic Church because they can use them as an excuse to reject true Christianity. But anyway, going off a little bit there. But yeah, that is that. The four Babylons. 4 Babylons used to interpret Revelation 18. You can decide for yourself which one you think is correct. Maybe you think it's something else. Share that with me. And I know there was other Babylons, the original Babylon with Nimrod, where they built the Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar, modern-day Iraq. And then there's Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon in the land of Shinar, modern-day Iraq, where he built his city, which we have depicted here. And yeah, then we have the interpretations for Revelation 18. But with all that being said, thanks for watching. Take care. And stay tuned for the little clips I like to put at the end of my videos. Alright, here's the 3 verses that I like to put in all the videos here. Isaiah 34:16, seek ye out the book of the Lord and read, so that Jesus doesn't tell you what he tells the Sadducees here in Matthew 22:29, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures. It's not that you err in error because you don't know the one true church that happens to be your denomination, or that you don't know the fundamental beliefs, or the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, or whatever creed, or that you don't know the magisterium or the clergy, or you don't know your favorite pastor or priest. That's why you're in error. No, you're in error because you don't know the scriptures. You need the scriptures to test to see whether or not those are correct, whether those are the right traditions, whether those are legitimate clergy, whether that church is actually following God, and whether those creeds line up. Those fundamental beliefs are found in the scriptures. Because knowing the scriptures is knowing God. Like we read here in John 17:3, Jesus says, and this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. This is a deep knowing. As Adam knew Eve and she conceived, you need to know God in like manner, so that you may be born again, that his word, his seed, it abides in your heart, where you truly believe that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh, that he died in your place and gives you his life in exchange, so that your righteousness, your good and your bad, your life, past, present, and future, died 2,000 years ago. Your life is his. He can do what he wants with it. He puts it to death, and he gives you his life in exchange, his perfect, eternal life. That's the deep knowing you need to know of God. So, there you go. Do you know him? Do you want to know him? Get to know him. Thanks again for watching. Take care.
So that fella couldn't join the church. He couldn't join the church. He couldn't get baptized. He couldn't get baptized. He woke up with God. He woke up with the devil. Are you saved? Amen. So that fella didn't take the sacraments. Didn't take the sacraments. Didn't say the rosary. Didn't take the rosary. Didn't tithe. Didn't tithe. He went to heaven. He went to hell. You saved? Didn't keep the law. He didn't keep the law. He broke the commandments. He broke the commandments. He didn't keep the golden rule. He didn't keep the golden rule. He woke up in glory. He woke up in the pit. Are you saved? You're saved. If you're not saved, you're over here or you're over here. You sure ain't in the middle. He said, Lord, remember me, thou comest thy kingdom. And Jesus turned to him and said, verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be saved. Just like that. You have been saved? If you ever saved, you were saved like that.